was first proposed in the 1980s. I think it was begun or built in 1985 or 1986. We have all the documents, the permissions that had to be, the permits that had to be got. And the Eruv was built by Rabbi Shimon Zatzal. Shimon was a Talmud of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and Baron Koppel. And he was a monk in Eruvin. He knew both their shittas and Eruvin. Just for the record, it's to be able to build an Eruv and even to update and maintain an Eruv with kashrus. Very often the Gadol Yisrael doesn't know Eruvin because he lives in a place where they don't use the Eruv. Nobody holds of the Eruv or whatever. It's not possible. So Reb Shimon Eider was mekabel Eruvin from Gedolei Yisrael, and he built the Eruv. He came back to check the Eruv again in 1994. When I was here, I was with him, and we discovered that there was a part of the Eruv where we were relying on the hillside. So the Fern Hollow Bridge used to be the end of the Eruv. It went along the cemetery, to the end of the cemetery, it crossed over Forbes Avenue, and then it went down along that hillside behind Beechwood Boulevard. When he came in 1994, we took another look at that, and he said we should measure it using a frame, which you're going to see. Well, you'll probably see a picture of it soon. And it was discovered that slope was not steep enough all the way along. There were breaks in it, so we had to move the Eruv over across the other side of the Fern Hollow Bridge, and use Braddock Avenue or the back lane behind Braddock Avenue. So the Eruv was expanded a little bit. It didn't really add many people because there are not that many Purim Yidden or Shomer Shabbos in that area. The Eruv was expanded further in the early 2000s to the whole hill. So the Eruv used to go, if you go up Whiteman Street, it went one block past on Whiteman Street. It went along Ellsborough down to behind to Murdoch, and then it went Ellsborough down to Ellsborough, and then Murdoch and Northumberland, Murdoch, and it closed over there. So just outside the Eruv, including the Rudolphs, and a few of them got together to expand the Eruv to include the whole of Squirrel Hill, which means that it went past, it used to stop halfway down Darlington, along Murdoch. It went down Bartlett, and Bartlett until Beacon, but it stopped halfway down Darlington. Even Bartlett, only one side of Bartlett was in. So it included the whole of Bartlett, the whole of Darlington, right to the golf course, and then it went down Forbes Avenue until Beeler Street, and came back up Beeler Street to Whiteman. And that way we included the Murdoch Ponds. Then, in 2010, actually more, I think about 2015 or 2016, we expanded the Eruv to include almost all the hospitals. The only ones that are not included are Mercy and AGH. AGH is not Shiur, it's across the river. It's probably outside the Tchum, depending on how bendy the river is, because the bridge itself might be more than the Tchum. Now, if the river bends in a certain way, but not for today, to discuss how to be Merabeah, a city, to include things that might look like they're outside the Tchum to get them in. But see, it's too far downtown. But what we did include was the entire Oakland, as you can see in the map, and Shady Side, and a little bit up there to get Children's Hospital in. didn't quite fit in the picture here. To get children's hospital in as well, we made that little corridor up there. And then finally, must have been about a year ago, how long ago was the Greenfield expansion? 6 months ago. We expanded it to include the whole piece of Greenfield. But Hashem, for the Greenfield expansion, we didn't really use that many strings. We could really rely on fences, the cemetery, the cavalry cemetery, a little bit of string, some steep slopes back and forth, a few strings here and there. Okay. Okay, this is a picture of the frame. The frame is, we'll talk later about what a tail hamislakit is, but in order to get a hill that's steep enough to be kosher for an Eruv, we have to construct this kind of frame. We'll discuss it later. And this is the current Eruv. Okay. This is the website. You should check it. We'll take sponsorship. We'll take memberships as well. Anybody has to pay the membership. Now's the time. Always the time.
Pittsburgh Eruv.org, write it down.
Yeah.
I'll write it down, just get them on.
That's the one. Okay, we're going to be discussing these things in detail as we move along because but this is the outline. We're going to talk about the halachas of Eruv. We're going to talk about the quote legal theory, subterfuges, okay, and practical issues with a metropolitan Eruv. And what's the purpose of the Eruv and the functionality of the Eruv and the practicality of the Eruv. Okay, let's go ahead. Okay, so we have to talk about things that everybody knows, but we have to cover them over. There's a malacha of hoitzah. Hoitzah means carrying, carrying outside. So the issue of hoitzah is from Rishus Harabim to Rishus Hayakid, from Rishus Hayakid to Rishus Harabim, or 4 amas in a Rishus Harabim. Rishus Harabim is translated public domain. Rishus Hayakid is translated private domain. That's the translation. What are they? What is a Rishus Hayakid? What is a Rishus Harabim? You have a slide on that? Yeah. Okay, you mentioned over here, malach is considered a malach of the ruach. All the malachas of Shabbos make a tikkun. They're misakim something. You change from one thing to another, except for Hoitzah. Hoitzah, you don't change anything. Change the rishus. So the Tosfos calls it a malach of the ruach. Okay, let's first talk about rishus around rishus hayah. So Rishus Hayakid is the easier thing to
go down like 3 slides. Go down 3.
What's the Rishus Harabim? They mentioned Rishus Hayakid.
Yeah, when the one page before.
Okay. So Gemara says, the Brisa says there are 4 Rishuyos on Shabbos. Rishus Harabim, Rishus Hayakid, Karmelis, and Makom Patur. Rishus Hayakid is the easiest thing to define. Rishus Hayakid, everyone agrees, and has to be an enclosed area. The only machlokes is what's called enclosed. Machlokes tanoim, we go by the chachamim. If it has walls on 3 sides, it's considered a rishus hayakid. Walls on 3 sides have to be 10 tefachim. Now, as we're going to see, it doesn't necessarily have to be walls coming up from the ground between the 2 rishuyos. If you're on a cliff, and there's a drop of 10 tefachim to below you, that's also considered a wall. That's a Rishus Hayakid. Midoraisa. Midoraisa, walls on 3 sides of the Rishus Hayakid. Rishus Harabim, there's no walls, or maybe 1 wall, or going to the Chachamim, even 2 walls, and it's a public thoroughfare. That's Rishus Harabim. There's a machlokes tanoim, whether Rishus Harabim for Hoitzah as opposed to for other things. For Hoitzah has to also have 600,000 people using it. Why? On a daily basis. Why would that be? Because all the malachas of Shabbos are learned from the Mishkan. What was done in the Mishkan. They saw in the Mishkan was when they dismantled the Mishkan, they took it from where it was onto wagons. The wagons were the dimension of a Rishus Yachid. The Navy, the Navy that carried the Mishkan, they put everything on the Mishkan except for Bnei Kahat, Bnei Gershon and Bnei Merari. They put it from the Rishus Rabbim, which was the area of the Mishkan. The Machane Leviyah was considered the Rishus Rabbim, onto these wagons, which was the Rishus Yachid. So that's the Hotzah. There's also a lot of details in Hotzah that are learned from their Hoshata, things like that, which we're not going to go into. That Rishus Rabbim of the Machane Leviyah was a Mokaim where 600,000 people came, because there were 600,000 people in the Mikvah, men at least. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you want to call it a Rishus Rabbim for the Malach of Hotzah, Midaraisa, it has to be used by 600,000 people. The Chachamim disagree, and they say that if it's 16 amos from one side to the other side, that becomes a Rishus Rabbim. There's a road that's 16 amos wide, all being used by the public, then that's called a Rishus Rabbim. So, how do we pass it? So the minute, as you said, here I can pronounce it.
A little further down.
Okay. Number one.
Another one, yeah.
The white is a bit hard to read.
Here it's easy. Mechaber and Shulchan Aruch.
Okay, so Mechaber paskins like the Chachamim, basically, that it's wide enough. The Ramah doesn't pass in that way. The Ramah paskins Tosfos, we should say Tosfos. Tosfos, a few different places in Shabbos, says we don't have Rishus Rabbim B'zman Hazeh. What does Tosfos mean? Tosfos means we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, that in order for it to be a Rishus Rabbim, you have to have 600,000 people. And in the times of Tosfos, they didn't have such roads. They didn't exist. Roads that were that big, that 600,000 people were using them every single day. So Tosfos says in a few places in Shabbos, Ein lanu Rishus Rabbim B'zman Hazeh, and therefore there's all sorts of pillars that apply. We'll discuss a couple of them either later today or next time on Thursday. So there are more passing back places. Now the Mishnah Brura, Biur Halacha, you have over here the Alter Rebbe recalls the widespread practice to allow the construction on the earth where there are no 600,000 people. That is Minhag Yisrael, at least in the European Ashkenazim. The Rabbi Shimon should not allow a pole and string Eruv on any 16 on the street. Okay, we'll talk about pole and string Eruv in a minute. So the Mishnah Brura and Simon Shimon makes a list in the Biur Halacha of he counts the Rishonim who hold the different shittas, and he comes out that it's the Roiv that hold like the Chachamim. What's the Roiv? 12 against 11. That's the Roiv. 12 against 11. We count 23 Rishonim, 12 of them hold like the Chachamim, and 11 hold like Rabbi Yehuda. The later Achronim were very unhappy with this Mishnah Brura. They say that there's no Nimnu B'Gomru and such a thing. This is something that's discussed. If you ever learn to Kollel Eretz the Shach, Hatzvi-Bais, you're there. So when you're allowed to take a list of Rishonim and pitch them against the other Rishonim, there was no Nimnu B'Gomru. Plus, if you look at the list, you'll see that a lot of them are just quoting the earlier ones, so that's not a new shitta. Plus, since then, we found other Rishonim. And every now and again, people find more Rishonim and they print them. So how can you make a list like that? You have to go by what the minhag is. Nonetheless, it is ongenommen that if people can, they should be kosher for the machmir shitta. Okay. Okay, Surah Pesach. The next thing we're going to discuss is Surah Pesach. So before we get there, there are another two Rishuyos. There's a Karmelis and a Makom Patur. So really, anything between a Rishus Rabbim and a Rishus Yochid, that's neither this nor that, Min HaTorah is not considered a Rishus. We'll call it Min HaTorah a Makom Patur, which means that if you carry from a Rishus HaYochid into that area, or from a Rishus Rabbim into that area, you're not Chayav Katos. There's no Chayav Katos. Because you didn't take from Rishus Rabbim to Rishus Yochid, or Rishus Yochid to Rishus Rabbim. So to be Chayav Katos, you would have to have, according to the Ramah, a street that has 600,000 people traveling on it, or living on it, or combination, and a private house that has a door opening to it, and you carry from the house into that street, or from the street into that house, or you carry 4 amas in that street. That would be Chayav Katos Min HaTorah. You did it by mistake, you forgot that it was Shabbos, you'd have to bring a korban. But if you don't have that kind of rishus, it's not a Chayav Katos Min HaTorah. The Chachamim gave most of those types of rishuyos a new rule called the Carmelites. They called it the Carmelites, like from the word Keren, a vineyard. It's a place that is used by the public, let's say, that's most of them, but it doesn't qualify as Rishus Rabbim Da'Rais. So let's say you go like the Ramah, you have a street that's 16 amas wide. This part of Beacon Street right over here, the wide part, is probably 16 amas wide. You can't count the place where the cars are parked. They're called Sedodim. And the grass, you can't count the little grass, you count the. And here, to the Rabbin, but either. So the Chachamim gave it a the Rishus it has to have a minimum space, horizontal space. And it's not within the dimensions of a Rishus Yochid either. So either that can be, if it's, let's say, 10 tefachim high, but it's too small on top, or less than 10 tefachim, anything between 3 and 9 tefachim high, that would be considered a Makom Patur. And if you carry there, not only if you carry there are you potter, but it's not even really awesome. You can actually carry on to that Makom. It's very impractical. Almost it's very hard to find it. It's called a Makom Patur nowadays. It would have to be something sticking up in the middle of the street with nothing around it. Usually a wall, let's say, that's a straight wall and then has a very small surface on the top of it, but it's usually considered part of the Rishus HaYochid. The top of the wall is part of the Rishus HaYochid, according to the way we pass them. If there's a hole in the wall, then depends how far the hole goes through. I don't want to get into that.
A tree stump, like a tree stump, perhaps?
Tree stump, yeah, a tree stump could be, if it's a small tree stump and it's above 3 tefachim. If it's a small tree stump in a Rishus Rabbim, that's less than 4 by 4. Yeah, you can have Makom Patur. It's useful if you find one, because if you have something in your pockets and you don't want to put it down, if you put it down, you're going to be over on Mitzvah. Mitzvah, you have to have Akira and a Hanoch. You have to pick it up from Rishus HaYochid and put it down in Rishus Rabbim, or vice versa. But if you did the Akira, but you didn't yet do the Hanoch, if you do the Hanoch on a Makom Patur, then you don't have a Malacha, the Eraisa. And since it's Mutar Chatchilas, that would be, I don't know whether a Makom Patur is practical that much nowadays, but so anything else is called a Carmelis. So Carmelis is something that's public, with no walls, that doesn't qualify as a Rishus Rabbim. There's another type of Carmelis, and that is a large open area that might have walls around it, but doesn't have any houses in it. That's called a Karpap Yosem and Beis Sosayim Shaloi Hukaf Lediva. Beis Sosayim is 50 amas by 100 amas, which is not as big as it sounds. Not as big as it sounds. And I think the Giant Eagle parking lot.
There's a slide like 8 pages down by carpet.
Okay, we'll get this. Okay. No. So that's the other type of Carmelis. So there are 2 types of Carmelis. Either it's neither Rishus Rabbim nor Rishus HaYochid, that the Chachamim gave it a din midrabanan, of Rishus Rabbim, and they asked l'chatchila to carry into there or out of there, whether you're going into Rishus Hayachid or whether you're going into Rishus Rabbim, plus carrying within that place they also asked. There's another type of Carmelis, which is really a Rishus Hayachid min HaTorah because it has walls around it, but it's too big to be counted as Rishus Hayachid. The Karpap Yosem and Beit Lafani. So they base that on the Chotzer HaMishkan as well. So once you have this Karpap Yosem and Beit Lafani, we're going to treat it like a new Rishus. It's very important to remember that a Karpap Yosem and Beit Lafani, that's Mukab, but Lo Hukab Ladiro, which means nobody lives there, is really a Rishus Hayachid min HaTorah. So whereas carrying from a regular Carmelis into Rishus Rabbim, you wouldn't be chayav. But if you carry from a Karpap Yosem and Beit Lafani Lo Hukab Ladiro into a Rishus Rabbim, you would be chayav. You'd actually be chayav katos. You just have to remember those things. Okay, so now we have the four Rishuyot. So the Chachamim were Mesakein, having made their chumrah on the Karpa, on the Carmelis, they were Mesakein a din called Eruv. What is an Eruv? Do we have that here? That one, up or down? Eruv, go to down.
Eruv? Yeah, it's really nice.
Okay. I think it's good, okay. Okay, I'll talk about Eruv. Eruv is like this. You need to do two things. Okay, before we get there. So Chachamim also asked, so they asked carrying from Rishus Hayachid to a Carmelis, from a Carmelis to Rishus Hayachid. They also asked carrying from Rishus Hayachid to Rishus Hayachid. But there's a Machlekes Rishonim. What it says over here is only one shitta. I think it's only the Rambam. There's a Machlekes Rishonim, what they asked and from one Rishus Hayachid to another Rishus Hayachid. So now let's explain. Rishus Hayachid to Rishus Hayachid doesn't really exist min HaTorah. There is no such thing. Min HaTorah, if the outside walls outside both Rishuyos are big enough, then the whole inside is one Rishus Hayachid. It's all one for Hitzah on Shabbos, it's all one Rishus Hayachid. So if the Chachamim were Mesaken, that it's possible to divide up a Rishus Hayachid into many Rishuyos Hayachid. There's a Machlekes Rambam and Rashi, what that means. Shuvas Rashi, brought from Tosfos in the 6th period of Eruvin, holds that inside my house is my Rishus Hayachid. Rishus Hayachid can be determined by ownership. So if it's my house, from my house to your house, let's say we had a window going between my house and your house, we wouldn't be allowed on Shabbos to carry from my house to your house. That's Rashi's shitta. Without an Eruv. I would have to have an Eruv if I want to go from my house to your house. The Rambam doesn't hold like that. The Rambam holds that you're allowed to carry from one house to another house if they're right next to each other. But if there's a common area in front of a house, then in front of both houses, which we'll call a kosher. A kosher is a classic example of a common area. Nowadays, you'd have a shared driveway, would also be the same thing. If there's common area between two privately owned houses, that the Chachamim gave it a din as though you have to imagine that it is a Rishus Rabbim. And therefore, you can't carry, even if there's walls all around the whole Chotzer, you can't carry from the private houses into the Chotzer or back. It's as though you're carrying from a Rishus Hayachid into a quasi-Rishus Rabbim. That's clear throughout Maseches Eruvin, a Chotzer. You have to have an Eruv if you want to carry into a Chotzer. Everyone agrees to that. Rashi is Moiseh that even between one private house and another private house, when you're not going through a Chotzer, there you also need an Eruv. We do actually, we do make an Eruv with kosher for Rashi, maybe the Sfardim or not. So if you do live in the house right next to another person with no common areas, but you want to take straight from one house, directly from one house to the other house, that you need an Eruv. Now, Kamina would be if you say a bracha, because if you want to be machmir, you can be machmir. You can't say a bracha. So that's my Machlokes Rambam and Rashi. So what the Rambam is saying, the way, let's go first with Rashi. The way Rashi understands the Takonas Chachamim is that they made the gezerah to asa carrying from any rishus to another rishus. You're not allowed to carry from one rishus to another rishus. Rishus min haTorah means rishus harabim or rishus hayachid. Midrabanan rishus means ownership. If I'm a balabos in my house and you're a balabos in your house, I can't carry from my house to your house. The Rambam learns pshat. No, that's not quite what they did. What they did was they said you can't take from a private rishus ownership to a common rishus because that they consider the like of rishus harabim. After all, what does rishus harabim mean? It sounds like it means it belongs to the rabbi. That's what it sounds like. So anything that belongs to more than one person, the Chachamim made that into rishus harabim, and therefore you'd need an eruv over there. So what is an eruv? An eruv makes it into one rishus hayachid owned by one person. How do you do that? Everybody who's in the same kosher contributes, brings their bread to one of their houses, and that person becomes the balabos, and everyone else is his oirach, is his guest. They're sleeping in their houses and they're eating by him. They're not really, but they can. That's how you make an eruv. That's how you make an eruv chatzir. Just like you can make an eruv between the different houses in a kosher, you can make the entire city into one big kosher. You put a hekav, you put a wall around the whole city. It's now one big kosher. Now that it's one big kosher, everybody gets together and they put some bread aside. Once you reach 18 people or more, you don't need to have more than 18 prusas. 18 pieces of bread. And those 18 can be good enough for 1,000 people, 10,000 people, doesn't make a difference. So what we do nowadays is we make the eruv with a box of matzah, and a box of matzah, a pound of matzah is considered 18 prusas, 18 pieces, good enough, and that's good enough for an eruv for the entire city. In the olden days, they could make one big challah, a big one, big enough that everybody would get a decent piece, and that would be kosher for an eruv. You're not supposed to use broken pieces for an eruv. Not going to get into that now. So that's the way we make. That's the eruv. But I mentioned before that the way you do it is make the whole town into one big chutzner. How do you make a town into a chutzner? The halacha is like this: if there's a real rishus harabim going through the town, then you have to close up the rishus harabim properly, which means that you need to put up a gate. Dal soisen and olois balaylos has to have doors that can close. So let's say Yerushalayim has gates. Maybe there's a rishus harabim going into Yerushalayim, but it has gates. So those gates could be closed by night. And there are places where they're made in eruv and they had to do this. In Queens, they made an eruv in Queens, and there's a big street there called Queens Boulevard. And they rolled up a chain link fence and put it on the side. And once a year at 3 a.m., they close off Queens Boulevard and they unroll the chain link fence and close off the road for an hour. And then they roll it back. That's good enough for Dal Soisen and Olis Balayla. We use Dal Soisen and Olis Balayla in our eruv as well, which I'll get to in a little while. That's if you have a rishus harabim. If you have a carmelis, then all you need to do is to put up mechitzas around it, and you can have breaks in the mechitzas. A break can be up to 10 amos. How do you make a mechitza? So standard mechitza you make by building a wall. But you can't always build a wall. Sometimes you can't build a full wall. So there's something called a tzuras hapesach. What does a tzuras hapesach mean? It looks like a doorway. Lechi mikan, the kone al gabeha. Lechi means a post over here, and a post over here, and a reed, a very thin thing going across the top. Anything that goes across the top. That's called a tzuras hapesach. The tzuras hapesach has to be, as you see the picture behind here, it actually has to be has to have the two sides. The two posts have to come underneath the corner. Okay. Huh?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we use for a lechi and a corner, we use for a lechi, we use existing poles, and corner we use existing wires. Problem is that most of the poles, if you look down the street, you'll see the poles don't go directly under the wire. The wire is attached to the side of the pole. There is a wire, a high voltage wire, usually going over the top of the poles, but it's not going directly over the top. There's a bracket coming out of it and holding the high voltage wire. That's a very high top wire, the 23,000 or 11,000 volts. And those wires, usually they're quite straight. There's a machlokes haposkim whether or not the fact that there's a bracket coming out of it is an extension of the pole and therefore the wire is going directly over the pole, or whether the bracket coming out of it is sticking off the pole. And therefore the wire sometimes doesn't go over the pole. It depends if the bracket is parallel with the wire or the bracket is perpendicular to the wire. If the bracket is parallel to the wire, then the wire goes over the pole. So what do? We choose one of the lower wires, let's say a cable wire, which is the lowest wire, or a telephone wire, which is one above that, and we use that as our conduit. And then we attach a lechi to the pole directly under that conduit. And that way, on both ends of the pole. That way, we now have a tzuras hapesach. What's the theory? What's the logic of the tzuras hapesach? So the easiest way to explain it is the Avnei Nezer. The Avnei Nezer says that every wall, somewhere you have to have a door. If you have 4 walls and no door, no, that's a bias. A bias off there, right? Whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So there has to be a door somewhere. So once there's a door,
Bias is
huh? A cover soft. Yeah. A cover soft and sort of thing. So you have to have a door. So the door, it doesn't say how big the door needs to be or small. So you could basically have a door taking up the whole wall. You have it on just a little piece on one side, a tzim, or whatever you want to call it, a mezuzah, a little thing on the side, on the other side, and the top of the wall. So you open the door and you made it bigger and bigger and bigger. That's the Avnei Nezer's way to explain it. So that's the tzuras hapesach. Now we have the tzuras hapesach, and we keep going like that. If we can use a mountainside, or if we can use a solid fence, then we use a solid fence. Why not? And that's the way we make the Eruv. We make it around the city, combination, walls, mountainside, solid fences, combination of them, or however you want to make them, and you end up having a heck. A hekuf means it's enclosed. Now you've enclosed the entire area, you've got a hekuf mechitzas. And we also make an Eruv. We take matzahs and we actually pass it around between the shuls. We make an Eruv, it's kept in a shul, that's the minig. The minig is to keep it in a shul, which is a bit, by the way, a bit controversial, a place to discuss it, because nobody lives in a shul. That's why you're not really allowed to eat. You're allowed to eat here because this place was built as part of the school and with all sorts of money. But generally speaking, in the olden days, they didn't live in a shul. So the place can say the chazan used to have an apartment in the shul, and then very often in the shul there's a room somewhere where if someone gets really tired, the rob, the chazan, whatever, he can go and rest. So the shul is where we keep them in the shul. Nowadays our shuls are all multi-purpose, so they're used for eating, which is considered a dira. Okay.
When they were using challah, so everything they make it.
Matzahs, we use matzahs.
I mean, the old days.
Yeah, we make when they use challah, they make new one every week. Yeah.
Wow.
The lechis are reaching the wires.
So, and if you don't have a wire, then you make it straight. Now the wires have to be straight. They have to be straight. If the wire is pulled in either direction and you can see that it's pulled, you can very often it's blowing a little bit in the wind and you can't tell. You wouldn't know unless you had very sensitive equipment. But you can see it's being pulled. Like the cable wire, sometimes they attach to the houses from the street cable at the light bulb. But sometimes they attach it in the middle and it pulls the wire in one direction. You can go down the street, you'll see some wires pulled this way, some wires pulled that way. So then we can't use that wire. So we have to improvise, either go to another wire, so we have to move over. You have to have a second lechi, because one lechi with the straight wire is on this pole. Now we're using another wire further up, so we make a second lechi. And otherwise, you could use the same lechi, but two sides. Okay, half of it goes to this side, half of it goes to this side. And or if we don't have a second wire that's good, then we have to make a string. We have to put up a string. And the string we use very high tension strings, and we tighten it very much. There are people who use fish line for it. It's very hard to see it. You know, it's wrong. A lot of the places are using fish line. They have purpose-built special poles. You can see the Eruv as you go around the country. So we make our own Suras HaPesach.
That tree in the picture counts as a lechi?
Yeah. Oh. So the tree counts as a lechi if.
Sorry, give it a second.
Okay.
One time, listen.
Huh?
The wire is pulling on the thing. Okay, it came back.
Okay. Okay. The tree, the reason the tree is good is because underneath it is solid. You can't use a tree, you can't use a branch that's sticking out of the tree and put a string on there, because then the string is not on top of the lechi. If you want to use the tree as the lechi, underneath it has to be solid. Underneath it.
Lechi doesn't have to be straight.
No, lechi does not have to be straight. It can't be horizontal, so it doesn't have to be perfectly. One actually talks about using animals as lechi as well. So if you tie it down properly.
No, the string goes through the tree.
Okay, so that's my place. If you're asking me, I'm the rabbi of the area. I don't like the shitta that says that the string can go into a tree. There is a shitta that you can do that. You can have a string going right into the tree, and the tree will be considered the lechi. The underneath part is the lechi, and the top part you ignore. Just ignore the top part. That's called the Prima Godim uses the Lashon Kedera Habanotim, like the builders. But other places say no, it should be open on top. Otherwise, it's not really on top, it's in the middle, it's not really on top. So we always put our strings on top of something, we don't let it go in the middle.
Okay, so I'm meaning another question. Let's say it's a tree, it's not using it as the left branch is hanging. Could there be branches under the?
Yeah, you can have things going inside and outside of the Tzuras HaPesach. You can't have two Tzuras HaPesach interfering with each other. You can't have them crossing over each other. That's no good. But we'll talk about some of the problems later. Now, since the lechi me'ikar hadin only has to be 10 tefachim high. The kona al gabeim can be high, like by sukkah. You can have the farmers don't have to be magias to start. The same with the Tzuras HaPesach. The lechi doesn't have to reach the string, which is very useful in many situations. But in the city Eruv that we make, it's very, very deceiving. So you think that if you put a lechi 10 tefachim high, it's going to be directly under the wire that's on top. Now go out, not at night, but go out tomorrow and look down the street at the poles, and you'll see there are very, very few poles. I don't know if there are any that are vertical. They're all leaning some way or another. Consider the fact that the wire is sometimes very high up from where your lechi is, and you make a lechi 10 tefachim high, and it's a thin little thing. We're using UV casing, which is the thing that's like a half-inch casing that's used to cover ground wires that they have coming down from the poles. So we use it just, it's empty. So it's a very thin thing, and the pole doesn't have to be leaning too far, an inch away, and now your lechi is not under your string. Just an inch over. And tell you, some of these poles are leaning over a foot, 2 feet, 3 feet. You can't see until you measure it. So you have to get a laser level. So the only way to be sure that it's good is to make the lechi go all the way up to the wire that you're using. Has to go all the way to the top or to the string. Or the string has to go right on top of whatever it is that we're doing. Pull it down and go right on top there. Because,
The left could be at a slant as long as the string is pretty over.
yeah, the lecky can be a lot, and we have actually, we didn't take a picture of maybe next time. The lecky in
Under the bridge.
in Forbes parking lot, we're not using it now, but in the golf course parking lot, the one that goes like this. Sometimes, oh, by the bridge, right. Sometimes we have to make a lecky, and there's a lecky, we have a nice corner going up that's like a bridge beam, a bridge girder, but right at the end where we want to make the Torah for Pesach on the bottom, there's something sticking out underneath the girder. So now if you put your lecky over here, there's a gap between the lecky and the Torah and the corner. Because the corner can't go all the way because there's a piece sticking out. So we put a lecky underneath and bend it out to be underneath the girder. And then we use a laser level to make sure that it's directly underneath. So we use metal. For those cases, we have to use metal. Okay, so this is the Torah for Pesach. Now you see somebody making a repair to an area. That's how we make Torah. Now, there's two problems with Torah for Pesach.
Nobody. It's a kosher to use.
So the main issue with the Torah for Pesach is that the Shittas Rambam. There's something called Paratz Meruba al Ha'omed, or Omed Meruba al Ha'paratz. So Paratz Meruba al Ha'omed means like this. The best area we mentioned before is if you have walls, actual walls going around the enclosure. Nobody argues about a wall. Surah Pesach is a chiddush. It's a chiddush of the Chacham. So if you have walls going around 51% of your heckers, you actually have walls, then the remaining area can be Surah Pesach as wide as you want it to be. The Surah Pesach, some of our Surah Pesach are probably 20, 25, maybe 30 amos. But if you don't have 51%, you don't have the majority of solid walls or cliff size, but you have the majority as Surah Pesach, the shitta of the Rambam is that every Surah Pesach has to be a maximum of 10 amos wide. 10 amos, and that's a Torah. Anything more than 10 amos is not good. And that's basically.
Sorry, does it make a difference weird if the 51% is two walls down fit?
No, it can be, as long as it doesn't have to be contiguous. It does not need to be contiguous.
I'm not thinking, but does it make a difference where they are? Like
No, it doesn't need to be
Anywhere.
contiguous. You add it all up, the bits and pieces, yeah.
So it's the heck, you take the
The heck.
circumference and
Yeah.
you make the.
Now, most city Eruvin do not have that milah. There are certain city Eruvin where they do. The best ones are cities where the houses are built joining each other. And then they actually use the houses, the fronts or the backs of the houses to make the hecker and then just connect it across the street. So they're basically using walls. So those ones you're very lucky.
Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is 1%.
I don't know. I'm not sure. Pittsburgh does have a huge amount of wall that we're using, and I've tried to figure it out. I don't know. I'm not sure how to measure it, how it's going to work, but we do have a huge amount of mountainsides and walls. But we also have a huge amount of Surah Pesach as well.
You have to make sure they're all 10 minutes or less each.
Oh, so this is the Rambam Shitta. The Mechaber brings the Rambam Shitta, and he brings the other Shitta, and it's not clear how the Mechaber himself holds. And therefore, it's brought down that Yirei Shemayim should try to be machmir for the Rambam Shitta. That doesn't mean that the Eruv is possible, but it's not contrary to the Rambam. It's very important for people who don't use the Eruv not to say that I don't hold of the Eruv. That language is a very bad language. That language is, the Tzedukim use that language. Why? Because Eruv is all the Rabbanon, and the Tzedukim didn't hold of the Rabbanon. So that's called Einoi Moida Be'eruv. They didn't hold of the Eruv. So a Tzeduki had a very interesting status. Besides the Heker and the Eruv joining all the Jewish-owned Rishuyos, we need a third part of the Eruv, which is called Schirus. We have to nominally rent all the public spaces that are also controlled by Goyim. So Goyim have the rights to the streets just like we do. And because they have rights to the streets, the Chachamim will massacre that you need to make serious from a Goy. The only time you don't is if it's only 1 year living in the street with all that everyone else is going. So in that case, you don't need to make a spirit from a God. Why? Because Diras Akum lo shmei dir. The Dira of Akum for this one, for Hilchos Eruvin, where the guy lives is not counted as a Dira. But Chachamim said, even so, they were massacring the Takon. They did not want Yisraelim to live in the same streets as Goyim. So they made a takon. They said, if it's 1 year living in the street, we're not worried he's going to stay. After a while, he's going to want to move away. But if it's 2, then they're going to stay. So to discourage that, they said you're going to have to make schirus from the goyim if you want to be matzah your aim. And they knew that very often the goyim don't want to make schirus. So what we do with Shtat Eruvin, the city Eruvin, is we make a schirus. Every 20 years, every 50 years, the schirut is made. The halacha is you can make a schirut from a balabas, a goyish balabas, or for someone who works for him, who has authority to make some decisions with his property and to go into his property whenever he wants. So there are different ways to do it. They used to use the chief of police. That was before they had public utilities. What we use is the county commissioner, because part of the area is outside the boundaries of Pittsburgh itself. So it's in one of the other cities. So we use the county commissioner. And we make a skirus from him on behalf of all the publicly owned areas that the Goyim have rishus in the public over there. That's a skirus. And if a person is an Eino Moed Be'eruv, then he can't be a part of the Eruv. You can't include him in your Eruv, because he's Eino Moed Be'eruv. So you have to include him in skirus. Not a very, very pleasant status to have. So what you should say, if you don't want to be soymach on the evidence, you should say, I want to be machmir and not to be soymach on the erev, but it's a kosher erev. So,
Could you use the Beruba image that you're not actually using for the Erev? Because in fact, we have how to go around.
no, it's got to be part of the hecker. Some sort of a hecker. Yeah, the hecker that we use. Okay, so that's how you make an erev around the city. And again, as I said, we're using some very large tsurais hakas. Let's see what we're doing here. What next? Huh?
Maybe
Let's see what else we have over here. Okay. Let's talk about Osi Rabbi Muluvat. So one of the reasons why a Tzuras HaPesach isn't good enough.
maybe another minute.
Okay.
Continue on Thursday.
Okay, we'll continue on Thursday. One of the reasons why a Tzuras HaPesach is not good enough across the Rishus Rabbim is because it's not a mechitza. People are walking back and forth inside it. It's not a mechitza. There's a rabbin going through there. So that's why you have to have gates. I'll just mention one place and we'll start. One place where we use the concept of gates, and that is the cemeteries. Cemeteries can't be included in an area. One of the reasons that the main reason they can't be included in the area is because they're usually a karpa, they're a place that is very big, that is not lived in. People don't live in the cemetery. And there are a few things like that, such as a very large pond. If it's not drinkable water, so it's not something that you can't live there. Another example is plants and flowers. By the way, this applies even in your backyard. So you should, tell your children about that. A place where there are things growing that nobody is allowed to walk isn't included in the area. Except that in your backyard, you don't need to make a fence around it because it's not big enough. The cemetery can be big enough. It has to be walled off from the Eruv. You have to make a wall separating it. Otherwise, we're all connected to a karpam shlehukav zero. So we put a wall around the cemetery. We don't have to do it most of the time. They already did it for us. There's one cemetery where the wall is only on 2 sides, and we have to make the wall on on one side, 1.5 side. We have to make a wall on about 3 sides. That's called the Smithfield Cemetery. But the Calvary and the Homestead Cemetery, those cemeteries have walls around.
All the people that exercise in the Longman Cemetery.
Yeah, so that's a new thing, you know. Among nobody did that. The person who was long, the Beisach Boris was a shaitan. Now, okay, so the thing about the cemeteries is that they have a gate. The ones that have a wall around them have a gate, and they lock the gates at dusk. That's because of liability, whatever the reason is. Insurance, the cemeteries are not lit up by night, they don't have street lighting. So they close the gate in the evening. And the gate is usually more than 10 amos wide. If it was 10 amos or less, you're allowed to have a break in the wall of less than 10 amos, or 10 amos, actually. You're allowed to have a break of 10 amos. Let's say that's a bit more than 16 feet. That's about 10 amos. You can have that break, and that's called, it's called a Pesach. It's not called a Pirzah. If it's more than 10 amos, 10.1 amos, it's called a Pirzah. You've now broken the wall and the Eruv is possible. You have to fix it. Now, the gates going into the cemeteries are more than 10 amos wide. So one way you can do this, put a Tzorah Pesach on, which Rabbi Shimon actually did on one of the Calvary cemeteries. Two of the gates. But the place can say that if the gates are closed at night, then the Pirzah is not a Pirzah. It's still a Pesach. It's a Pesach with the gate closed at night, just like it works on a real Rosh Hashanah, which is 16 hours wide, plus 600,000 people, but 16 hours wide. So it definitely works on the gate of a Beisach Boris as well. And that's what we're saying about. Both of the big cemeteries, actually we have a few cemeteries in the Eruv, and we're samech on the fact that they close the gates at night. So we're relying on the concept of Dalsos and all this for life. No Tzorah Pesach across. We'll stop over here.
Continue, Mr. Shem.
You have to close it every night. It's a year after that to close the gate.
Once a year, but they close it every night. Yes. Well, the 396. The point is I'm showing you. It's a click we're showing you. But Pashtus it is.
You can cut it out.
No, we cut. Big
One of the slides.
one of the slides. Yeah, we have to cut off the 376 in many different places. You have to cut it off at the max. You can't say the Rishuyos, the Mavuos that are not bullish to Rosh Hashanah also have to be cut off. So you need a wall. You can't just use a lechi. We don't use a lechi nowadays anyway. There's something called a lechi or a koira, which was used in a mobile. But the Chazon Ish says we don't have a mobile today. The mobile has to have the bottom of the katsera is psukim with soda. So it means it has to have these little compound opening into the street, which is the way people live today.
Yeah.
Let's continue, and then we'll have questions.